Hey guys, this is Nomiki Konst. You are watching the Nomiki Show. Remember, we are a new show, so please become a subscriber here on YouTube. And of course, any sort of patronage you'd like to give to our Patreon account gives you early access to shows, full interviews, special segments, and of course, we also have swag. So go to patreon.com/the Nomiki Show. This week has been insane. We have a weekly show, and problem with a weekly show is a lot can happen in between. So here we are today doing a special segment on the Iowa Caucus, what went wrong. As of now on Wednesday afternoon, we still do not know who the winner of the Iowa Caucus was, but we do know a little bit more about what happened. And roads seem to lead to this mysterious app that was contracted by the DNC to the state party of Iowa. Was pushed by the DNC. We know this at this point, that they pushed it, fairly recently, and it went to the state party of Iowa, and they were testing it a few days, weeks before, and there were some problems leading up. So we have Alex Kotch here, who is an investigative reporter. He's working for the Center for Media and Democracy. He has done a lot of work on this app prior to the Iowa Caucus, and now he's been reporting and tweeting out a storm about who this mysterious shadow app is and why they were given this huge contract for such a significant race. So Alex, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thanks a lot. Always posting.
Always posted. All
Always
right.
Posting.
Can't keep up. It's a 24-second news cycle. So let's just figure out where we are today. Last night we reported a little bit about Shadow App and we followed the money there, but there's more to know. And you actually were aware of this app before all of us learned about it just a few nights ago. How did you learn about Shadow, the company?
Well, last year, I think in the fall, late fall, the New York Times had a large story about this new group called Acronym. It's a political nonprofit, a 501c4 social welfare group that was planning to spend a bunch of money to counter Donald Trump's online, especially social media, digital operation, which is extremely effective and very, very large. And they spend a lot of money on it. This is a woman named Tara McGowan, who was a former Obama campaign staffer, who also worked at Priorities USA, which is a super PAC that tried to help Hillary Clinton in 2016. David Plouffe, a former Obama campaign manager, is an advisor on the board of advisors to Acronym. So the story essentially was like, they did some work in 2018 on state legislative races. Now they're going to try to go national, impact the presidential election, and it was kind of a bit of a sort of promotional piece about their plans. And so I was like, all right, who's behind this group? I mean, they're a dark money group, and because they're a nonprofit, meaning they don't have to disclose their donors. Mm-hmm. So I did know that they had an affiliated super PAC called Pacronym, however, and super PACs are required to disclose their donors, and they were around in the 2018 cycle. So I looked at the donors to that group, to Pacronym, and I found that mainly it was the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, which is a political group that Obama is affiliated with, Eric Holder is involved in, and they were helping fund some work on state legislative races in 2018. So that was a different focus. But essentially, looking into 2020, I started looking at Acronym, found out they have this Pacronym group. They also Tara McGowan, who is the CEO of Acronym, has her own for-profit consulting firm named Lockwood Strategy, which is a vendor to Acronym and a major vendor to Pacronym. Pacronym paid them $1 million to do some work, I believe, in the 2018 race. So that's, there's a lot of these links kind of between nonprofits and political groups, but also in addition to that, on the Acronym website, back in November when I wrote this story, it said that they also had acquired 2 for-profit tech companies, one of them being Shadow, which ended up developing the app that botched the Iowa Caucus reporting, and another company that got folded into Shadow after they were acquired. So it's essentially 2 tech companies that this nonprofit bought that were kind of merged into one called Shadow, and then Shadow is the company that botched it.
Okay, so before we get into Shadow, I just want to be super clear on this. So Tara McGowan was in an executive position at Acronym, and she was contracting to her LLC. Her Acronym was contracting to her LLC, as well as the super PAC contracting to her LLC.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's not necessarily illegal or anything. It's just the kind of thing that some nonprofit auditors might take a look at, just because I think it's a gray area. But if you're self-dealing too much, if you're only giving your own company's business from a tax-free organization, that could raise some eyebrows. Just as someone who reports on nonprofits a lot, that's something that you would want to kind of flag and look at as a reporter.
Right. It's not unusual. A lot of and sometimes, just to be clear, having looked at this stuff myself, sometimes people will pay themselves through an LLC rather than through their own name because it protects them. But she was getting paid separately as a staffer. So that am I clear about that? Like her as an executive, and then on.
I assume she's sharing in the profits of her own consulting business, and I also assume that she was making money as the executive of Acronym. As I recall, I don't think it was a whole lot of money. It certainly wasn't a full salary, but she obviously had involvement in Acronym, Pacronym, her own consulting firm. So there's different revenue streams.
Yeah. Yes, it's a very common, unfortunately, a shady area, but a lot of people do it. So let's talk about this app and who it was acquired, who ran it, who started it, what's the connection between the parties?
Right. Well, so the former CTO and then the COO of Acronym is the founder of Shadow Inc. I'm not exactly sure of the precise timeline, but I'm pretty sure that I think it was early 2019. He launched this company, and for 3 months he was working for both, and then I think in May or June of last year he left and allegedly just worked at Shadow. However, through other people's reporting, they share an office. They actually work together in the same space. So it's not as if they're completely independent as Acronym would have you think. So, I mean, we don't actually know because Acronym is being very tight-lipped and not really talking to any media about it. But from their very limited press statements, they're essentially trying to pretend that they don't own the company, that they're not involved, they have no idea what's going on, when it's incredibly hard to believe that, given the actual circumstantial evidence that's out there.
On the night of the Iowa Caucus, David Plouffe was on a panel on Chris Hayes at like 1 o'clock in the morning, and he basically distanced himself from the app, saying, "Oh, we just acquired it, and I'm on the volunteer board, so what do I know?" And it seemed to be that was the messaging that they immediately decided to take. So I'm curious, and if you don't know the answer to this, that's fine, but it might be something worth looking into. Who's representing these parties? What lawyers? And there's a reason why I ask that. Do you have any sense?
I have no idea, actually.
The reason I ask is one of the things that we learned on the Democratic Unity Reform Commission and on the Budgetary Committee, because we were trying to figure out, well, there's this thing called the Joint Fundraising Agreement that happened in 2016, where money was flowing from super PACs, into the state, into party, and then the party would go to the state parties, and the campaign would bring money from other areas. It was just flowing in all directions. It's very hard to explain. I think a lot of people know about how Hillary Clinton promised all this money to state parties, and then it turns out that money was flowing right back up to her campaign through other committees. But one thing that we learned through that was it was facilitated by a law firm that was really working with everybody, and that's not uncommon. I mean, this law firm in particular, Perkins Coie, works with a lot of races. It's not a monopoly, but there are a few law firms that kind of work with the Democratic establishment. I think what raised a red flag was in a presidential cycle when all these committees are working with each other, and then the challenger was not working with that law firm representing. It got confusing, and of course, as a reporter, you can't go and sit there and audit a law firm and figure out how things flowed. So that's why I ask, is it just seems like the structures are extremely complicated to a point where you have to be an expert in understanding how to move money from, one organization that's focused on redistricting into another organization, and then suddenly contract to an app company that is in charge of in this case, monitoring the Iowa caucuses.
Yeah, and it's unclear. I mean, I kind of think the 2018, the 2020 cycles are pretty separate in terms of their focus and also their funding. So, in 2019, the first couple reports they had to file didn't include any donation information. They weren't at Packard, excuse me, Packard was not really raising much money. But then for the second half of the year, in the last quarter especially, that report just came out. And so my former colleagues at Sludge, where I was working for the last 2 years, did a follow-up piece to my November piece showing that the biggest funders of Packard are Seth Klarman, who is a hedge fund manager out of Boston, whose firm owns a lot of Puerto Rican debt and was trying to impose austerity measures on Puerto Rico. Yeah. And then Donald Sussman, another hedge fund person, a perennial Democratic Party donor. Klarman actually is a former Republican donor who kind of changed his tune a few years ago.
Sussman, is this related to Emily Tish Sussman?
Yes, that's her father.
Okay.
So yeah, and I put that
remind us who Emily, and I know Emily, so I just she is somebody I've known for a long time and I have a decent relationship with, but just for disclosure because she's been in the press lately.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know anything about her other than that. I believe she's probably involved in the party structure, but I mean, what I know her from what she said on cable television a few months ago. She said Bernie and Warren are identical policy-wise. So if you don't vote for Elizabeth Warren, you're a sexist. So basically, if you vote for Bernie and because of his policy platform, then you're a sexist, which is kind of egregious. It was in the same stream of kind of media hits where Mimi Rocha said that I think Bernie made her skin crawl or something, and she didn't know why, but it just made her skin crawl. So that was just kind of like in that. That's how I know.
Yeah. She has a podcast, and Hillary Clinton just appeared on her podcast, and of course that was the one that Hillary was criticizing Bernie Sanders, exactly. Right. But aside from that, I mean, so that's very interesting. So Sussman and this former Republican, what's his name again? Klarman?
Seth Klarman. Yeah, he's a very wealthy hedge fund manager in Boston.
Why do you think they would fund this project?
That I honestly don't know. I mean, with Klarman, he started funding Democratic groups in 2018, maybe in 2016 to some degree, but I believe he actually gave to a group that spent money against Clinton in 2016, but he gave in 2014. The point being, he used to be a GOP donor, and then kind of switched over in the Trump era. I don't know. I really can't say, like, for example, I mean, is Baupost Group invested in some of these technologies? I don't know. I kind of doubt it would be a huge moneymaker for them to the scale that they are. I just think that Klarman is trying to ingratiate himself with the sort of Democratic Party establishment after having been a GOP donor in the past. Mm-hmm. Sussman is as I said before, a perennial Democratic donor, one of the biggest ones, millions and millions of dollars every cycle to sort of establishment-based groups and super PACs that back, for instance, Hillary Clinton and former candidates like that. So I just think they probably, I mean, if I had to guess, they probably were encouraged to donate by very powerful people who you worked with and who managed people like Tara McGowan and David Bluff. These people are very well connected, and so when they get a call from a top Democrat who says, look, we've got this new technology, it's so cool, look at their cool branding and their millennial taglines and their nice website, why don't you throw a couple mil and help them out? So again, I want to make clear that the donations to Packard are not really connected with money going to Acronym. We don't know the money going to Acronym because they're opaque. So, but I think it's reasonable to think that probably some of the Packard donors also provided money for Acronym, which then, of course, bought Shadow. So, in essence, is the main funder of Shadow. So,
Shadow has its own clients, and of course, one of the clients was with the IDP, the Iowa Democratic Party. But I'm not sure how far your reporting went into the DNC, but what I can say that I think it's fair enough. I've spoken to enough DNC members involved in state parties. There was a very serious push by the chair's office to get this app through the system, meaning he pushed it through the Rules Committee, and the Rules Committee is all appointees of Tom Perez. And then in really very late in the process, they pushed the state that are using caucuses to use this app to document the turnout and to document the numbers. There was pushback as recent as last week by people organizing on the ground in Iowa saying it didn't work. There was reporting on this. and nothing was done. So with that being said, a lot of the reporting that's come out shows that there were other contracts that Shadow had. Can you tell us a little bit more, political, non-political, just to understand, is this an app that's actually making money and doing stuff, or is this an app specifically for the Iowa caucuses, or specifically for the primary process?
I hate to say it, but I really don't know. What I do remember, following recently, that the Nevada Democratic Party also had a contract with Shadow to do the same thing. They canceled that pretty quickly after the debacle in Iowa. They're definitely not going to work with them anymore. And meanwhile, Tara McGowan is really kind of getting excoriated by other fellow establishment Democrats, at least all who are talking to the media anonymously. So I think that this is not going to bode well for her career. I also kind of cynically think that ultimately she won't necessarily pay a huge price, but I think this is a very
look at Rob's book. He's doing great. She'll be on CNN next week.
these folks tend to fall upwards.
Yeah.
I just think it was a horribly mismanaged startup, essentially under this weird nonprofit umbrella that was kind of a mini fire festival that happened. And I wish I knew more about Tom Perez and what kind of pressure campaign. But suffice it to say, Hillary Clinton tweeted out that New York Times article from last fall, and with praise for Pluff and Packard. A lot of the people who work at Shadow used to work for the Clinton campaigns. Also, a lot of people who work at Acronym and Shadow are ex-Facebook people. And Acronym, really, their main kind of stated goal is to push advertising on social media, especially Facebook and Twitter. They're also doing, I think, Instagram, probably. I'm sure Instagram and TikTok even to some degree. So, this is, you kind of have your Silicon Valley interests, and then you have your political interests, and it's not surprising like how this got pushed right to the top of the Democratic Party, and then you had the DNC chair kind of pushing it over the objections of some other people.
In terms of clients, who do they work with?
Shadow, I'm not sure. Again, just probably I know about the Nevada Caucus.
Pete Buttigieg contracted with them for a small
contract.
That's true. Right.
And Biden did as well. That's right.
Yeah.
So it was. I don't suspect. I don't necessarily think there's anything nefarious about that. They're close to the establishment. They probably had the recommendation, just like Iowa did, and they said, okay, let's try something out. There's certainly favoritism towards Buttigieg within Akron. I mean, Tara McGowan. I think her husband is an advisor to the campaign, the Buttigieg campaign. Again, that doesn't signify any actual kind of
No.
I think the conspiracy theories are incorrect. I think it was just a very poorly managed and kind of shoddy sort of app operation.
This is one thing that I like to reiterate. And Sam Cedar, who we film out of his studio and we go on the Majority Report all the time, will debate what is rigging and what is not. And my definition of the rigging is just this entrenched system in which people reward each other and there's no accountability or oversight. And it doesn't have to be like we're sitting in a room and we're plotting how to pull the plug right before the numbers are due or whatever. That's the conspiratorial aspect of it. I think that incompetence is a big part of the system that we operate in, meaning the Democratic Party. And as long as there's no budgetary oversight and there's no contractual oversight and there's no accountability, you're just going to perpetuate these problems. And so I think Sam agrees with me on that, but we constantly have this back and forth over where is the there. But with that being said, if the DNC had passed the budgetary oversight and contractual oversight and banned conflicts of interest, we very well would not be in the situation today. And of course,
and those were planks that you were pushing for on the Unity Commission.
On the commission, right? Yeah.
And so they didn't happen. Yeah, exactly. And I think one has to really remember who put his finger down on the DNC chair race. I mean, it was looking like it was going to be Keith Ellison.
That's right.
And then Obama comes in and says, no, my labor secretary Tom Perez is the guy for the job, and then that's what happened. And Perez, of course, is just part of that sort of Obama-Clinton blob that continues to control the party. And I think is responsible for a lot of these kind of back-scratching contracts, this kind of grift that's happened among that whole class of consultants and political operatives.
Yeah, and it's the people who sit on these rules committees, as I know you've looked into this stuff, and the different committees in the DNC that are appointed are undeniably, for the most part, with exception to maybe 15% of those appointed for good looks, basically, to make it seem like it's more democratic. But the majority of the appointments are people who have a vested interest financially within keeping the party the way it is, within whether it's contracts or having staffers of certain presidential candidates who are funded by special interests. I mean, there is an effort, a concerted effort, and this is the rigging that I find outrageous. There's a concerted effort to push out any sort of challenges to the status quo, to the budget efforts. Jim Zogby, who was on the committee pushing for budgetary reform, has been a part of the party since the late 80s. And he was one of the biggest advocates, as well as Ray Buckley, for budget oversight. And they were pushed off of the executive committee. That was an act, that was a decision by Tom Perez. And so you think after 2016, when there was all this investment in data, and the data couldn't tell you, go to Wisconsin and open an office, you'd think that they'd try to assess these issues, and they doubled down on it, unfortunately.
Yeah. And also, I mean, someone was making the point on Twitter today, like, look at the operation that helped elect AOC. Look at some of these leftist consultants who, of course, have been blacklisted by the DCCC because they're working with primary challengers to incumbent Democrats. A blacklist policy that Nancy Pelosi signed off on, Sherry Bustos as head of the DCCC implemented. Those are the people who got it. Those are the people who ousted Joe Crowley.
Yeah.
An unknown person in the Bronx ousted the number 2 Democrat in the House, essentially. Those are the people they should be talking to and saying, how did you do this? But they're not, of course. Right. And I also should say, on the topic of just this rules committee, I should plug my former website, Sludge, again. It's David Moore and Donnie Shaw just today put out a story. Bloomberg surrogates have seats on the DNC Rules Committee. 2 people who are apparently currently involved with the Bloomberg campaign are now on the Rules Committee. Just as the Rules Committee, there is you should tell us more. There is at least a small push to revise the reforms that you were part of last time about taking away the superdelegates' power in the first ballot. Is that correct?
I think that's a little. It's been over-reported, and my guess is, I wouldn't. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I feel like it may have been a story that came out as distraction away from a lot of other stuff that was happening. It's a really bad week for Tom Perez. I don't think he anticipated Iowa. This is why I'm like, it's not a conspiracy. I think that they really didn't anticipate Iowa turning out this way, because at the end of the day, It just makes them look like they're incompetent fools.
Everyone looks terrible. Of course.
Yeah, exactly. So, in 2000, when did we vote on this? We voted on the Unity Reform Commission in the fall of 2018. Or 19, but what year are we in? 2018, sorry. It's early 2020, it's very confusing. But
I'm in the same boat.
I can't.
I think it's 20, guys, let's just settle. It's 2017 right now. Okay, let's just settle.
It's still 2016 in my mind. Okay, so in August of 2018, we voted on the Unity Reform Commission recommendations before the entire DNC body. During that period, there was a very small faction that was really orchestrated by a group of bitter, old-timey white men in the party who had been in power. One person had been a chair of the Democratic Party, and openly despised anything associated with Bernie Sanders. And they felt that superdelegates were their right, and they are one of those members of the DNC that just felt like it was their privilege. And they worked with a very small faction of women of color on the DNC, and it became an issue regarding race. And the numbers actually don't show that, saying that the argument was that they were disenfranchising women of color by removing the superdelegates. That has been dispelled. Actually, Nina Turner gave an extraordinary speech dispelling this, and at the end of the day, Tom Perez delivered those votes and said, you're a small faction, and we have to vote for these reforms. Now, with that being said, that small faction it's half of that faction now that's pushing for the superdelegate reform. So my guess is it's not going to go anywhere. This is a group of people, again, these men that are just constantly, they're the ones who pushed against climate change debates, and they've just, they're naysayers. They want to be in control, in my opinion. So I think it was a distraction. I think it's also a tool for sometimes, this is politics. It could have been a tool for Tom Perez to distract away from the Rules Committee appointments. But, I think you're on to something, and I think we're on to something too, in that we have to pay attention to these appointments, not when it's too late. And unfortunately, there's not another DNC meeting until the convention, and these are the Rules Committee appointments. Then again, anything can happen, as we've seen. But as of right now, the oversight within the Democratic Party is minimal, if not non-existent. And, process is not interesting. And you were paying attention to the commission. I was on it, of course. It was very hard to get press. It was very hard for people to understand the structure of the DNC. And that's intentional. And I think DNC members who are elected, for the most part, get very frustrated that they put in their time and their effort. In California right now, they're running across the state, running for DNC membership. And at the end of the day, they're disenfranchised by these appointments by Tom Perez, who are just consultants who aren't involved locally and may not even live in the districts that they're representing. So, all right, final word. What do you think is going to happen?
You mean with the whole primary?
Well, with moving forward, these types of, is there going to be accountability?
I still maintain my general cynicism. I don't think too many heads are going to roll over this, but at least right now it's an embarrassment for everyone involved. And so, at least hopefully this shadow group and hopefully Acronym itself will be kind of demoted, and people will think twice about working with these people who kind of seem like ill-prepared grifters to me. I kind of doubt there'll be another caucus that's so riddled with failure like Iowa. I don't think anyone wants that to happen. But I do think, as we're just talking about, going into the summer, going into the convention, you got to watch out. It's going to be a mess. Who knows what's going to happen with these rules and resetting or not resetting them, and whether Bloomberg's going to have come in and have some delegates or come in and try to there's just so many possibilities we don't know.
Yeah.
I just think it's important to just have fair elections, get rid of the caucuses, get rid of the electoral college. It's so dumb what we're doing. It's not democratic. And so, use the popular vote, use ranked choice voting. These are reforms that really need to happen. So yeah, I think it's more. It's going to be a shit show. I don't know if Akron is really going to be a huge part of that shit show going forward, but we'll have to see.
Do you see any other grifty type of organizations out there that we should be aware of before anything catastrophic happens?
There's plenty.
Great.
Well, I think generally speaking, the whole kind of outside money game and politics and American politics is a bit of a grift. You see a lot of these outside groups, super PACs or C4s, that are spending over half of their revenue on staff salaries, on hooking up as sometimes their own consulting firms, sometimes other firms. Mm-hmm. A lot of it is just kind of taking money from very wealthy donors who have a lot of extra money to give, and just kind of, as you were talking about, it's like working, just propping up the system, the political system. It's kind of putting money in people's pockets. And so, I couldn't say this one or this one, but if you start to look at their reports that are coming out, you look at how much money they're taking in and how much they're spending on staffing and on administrative costs, a lot of times, they're barely spending any money on what they're supposed to be spending on.
Right.
So a lot of times that is a grift. Sometimes it might just be an operation that, is not making a lot of independent expenditures and is instead doing kind of basic stuff that is harder to parse.
Right.
But yeah, I think a lot of, look, Citizens United opened up a lot more money into our politics. It already was, sort of this kind of industry of this kind of major, long, extensive campaigns. Other countries have 1 month campaigns. They have much stricter campaign finance laws. And until we change the laws and actually enforce them too, that's a whole other step that's not happening.
Exactly.
Because the FEC doesn't have a quorum, so they can't actually even enforce what few things they maybe would. It's really, the main problem is just all this money that's in our politics, and we can change that. But you gotta really stem that stream, or we're going to still have all this grift and et cetera.
And just as a wrap up point on that, if all these Democrats, these centrist Democrats, establishment Democrats that say that they are against Citizen United and want to overturn it. My guess is if we actually got to a point, maybe it's a Bernie Sanders or possibly even an Elizabeth Warren presidency, who would be for overturning it, my guess is a lot of those folks would suddenly pull back because the grift got them or keeps them in their positions. These are their staffers. These are people who worked on their campaigns and helped them raise money. And suddenly you're going to be seeing people's true colors. So, Alex.
Yeah, there's a lot of that speculation. I will just add really quick that actually a few of the candidates in the Democratic race do have support of super PACs. Of course, they're not legally connected. I mean, there's even a super PAC that the National Nurses United has that's been spending in favor of Bernie Sanders. So it's not. I mean, that's union money, and I think they're. I mean, I've looked at their finances, and there's not a single billionaire donor just going in there and funding them. Most super PACs are funded by these very wealthy people, and they obviously have perverse motives, I think. But Joe Biden has the super PAC that he first initially in 2019 said he was against having super PACs, and now he's got his friends running one. And after a lackluster third quarter fundraising period, they said, "Oh well, it's actually we're not gonna disavow them now. Like we're not working with them, but we're just gonna let them do their thing." So they spent something like $5 or $6 million in Iowa, and look at what good he did. He got like 12%. So things are changing. The effectiveness of these TV ads and the outside spending groups, I think, are starting to wane. So I think that's a positive thing.
Okay, final prediction just on that note. Michael Bloomberg, who doesn't have to go to these donors for money, and can self-fund, where do you think his cutoff is? Because television ads can only work so much. He's going to have a ceiling, but it's going to be coming at a different point in the race, and of course that leads to the convention. But where do you think his ceiling is in terms of support?
Well, I mean, so first of all, he can run until the convention because he's a massive oligarch. He's the 8th richest person in the world. He has way more money than even Tom Steyer has, who's the other billionaire in the race. So, I mean, this guy can go on forever. And there's a lot of theories as to, like, why is he running? What does he think he can accomplish? Does he really want to be president? He just want to be a spoiler so Bernie or Warren doesn't become the nominee, something. There's a lot of things. But I will say, he's polling pretty well in some states after just barrages and barrages of ads that are kind of not going to happen next week. They're not the first 4. The media hasn't really focused their sights on those states, like California and other states. I mean, he's polling pretty well in like Michigan for some reason. I kind of think as we get closer to Michigan and stuff, like he's not going to do as well because there's going to be more of a focus on him, especially if he's polling like over 10%, 15%. In some polls, right? So he hasn't really. I mean, he's not even participating in the first 4 states. And the Sanders campaign hasn't started to put out their own statements and their criticism of his past as they have with Biden, and that's been very effective. Hitting Biden on Social Security, I think, really helped tank his Iowa chances, and that's probably going to help tank his New Hampshire chances. So they haven't even started that. And a lot of people, including myself, there's plenty of exciting stuff to research into Bloomberg, including the past as a Republican.
Exciting, I love it.
Well, when I say exciting, I mean like a lot of like money, right? Like I love researching money and following the money. So there'll be a lot of spreadsheets. If it seems like something that like I want to write, I want to pitch to someone, then I'll probably do it. But the point is, he hasn't gotten that kind of front runner scrutiny that Biden's been getting. And so I think that Bloomberg, his ceiling is more just like, I think his ceiling is essentially what he can do now by just spending ads without any accountability. And then once he starts being in the picture in the news, then that's going to take its toll. However, I will say, if Biden continues to flag and kind of is not really a factor anymore, we don't like Buttigieg could kind of take the sort of party establishment mantle. I think there's a lot of people who would like him to, but his polling with people of color is so bad that I think anyone with like thinking with their full brain would say this is just not viable. So I think some of them might say, oh well, look at Bloomberg's doing okay in the South, and he's this trusted guy. He only became a Democrat in 2018, but like maybe he can be the one to fend off Bernie Sanders or one. So I do think that if the party gets behind him, that could make him very, very dangerous opponent for the progressives.
Which ties back to the Rules Committee. Alex, thank you. Very very important information. I would love to have you back on as we, it's my favorite thing to do is to discuss money and politics because it just makes everything so much clearer. Appreciate your work. And where can we could find your information is it the Center for Media and Democracy, or are you still writing other places too?
Yeah. I mean, I'm full time with CMD. I do occasional freelance on the side, but yeah, we're at exposedbycmd.org. If you've ever been to SourceWatch, which is kind of a Wikipedia of the right, that's CMD. We also have a website called PR Watch. But you can follow our Twitter. You can also follow me just at Alex Kotch. That's Kotch, not to be confused with Koch. A couple political figures by that last name. But yeah, like I tweet out all my stuff and all my hot takes. So
Cool.
I'll see you online for sure.
Extremely online. All right. Take care, Alex. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.